Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know whether we're still waiting for some people, but actually they will join us later. My name is Laurence Porincini. I work at Natixis IB, and I support our corporate clients in their strategic developments in the area of technology. I'm going to talk here. We are going to talk here about mobility. Here I have Martin Viel. Hello. We are a corporate bank dedicated to growing companies. We're going to be talking about mobility. The previous speakers, Cédric O and Luc Julia, really got the debate going on the question of mobility. They haven't, however, discussed all of the topics. They gave a number of hints on these various topics, and we're going to try and answer these points. And over the past years already, we've seen a revolution in the area of mobility with the onset of a number of technologies. We've had literally an explosion of new services, and the offer has changed. We're talking about car sharing, carpooling. This is something that we experience on a daily basis. We're talking about self-service mobility. There are not lots of apps that exist and that we use on an everyday basis to simplify our lives in moving about. And there's also a use-based transportation consumption. And also something that's very recent is that we have a new integration, or the integration of a new component in mobility, and we started talking about it, namely the sustainable aspect of mobility and the fact that we want to have a zero-impact type of mobility. And we can see that that tomorrow's mobility trends are such that people will be eco-responsible, multimodal, and interconnected. Now, therefore, we can ask ourselves what role there is for technologies. How can technology allow us to have a cleaner mobility, more efficient and safer mobility? And in order to understand all of this today, we are fortunate because we have a number of mobility designers, Julien Nicolas, who's the Group Digital Director of SNCF, and he's the chairman of the 574 Invest Group. He's also dealing with the digital transformation of the group, with the We SNCF app that we use on a daily basis, all of us. But you also are opening your group to multimodal solutions. So we should talk about train, but we should talk about train, car, the car, and buses as well, and other types of means of transportation. And you will be sharing your vision of tomorrow's trains with us. Eric Maury is the head of environment and energy at Airbus Engineering, and you deal specifically with the commercial sector, and of course transportation and mobility is part of Airbus's DNA. Now you'll be telling us about tomorrow's airplanes and how they can be part and parcel of clean mobility. Thibaut Chassagne is the co-founder of Virtuo and is responsible for medium and long distance mobility for people who live in urban areas. And you develop your offer on an innovative basis with cars on demand, thanks to your app that we also all of us use, where a car can be delivered to our home, and then you can open it with your smartphone, and then you can travel freely with this car. So you will be telling us about the way mobility is consumed differently and how this has changed over the past years. Cédric Ferrero is the founder of Geosat. They were the first ones to use GPS data to come up with maps. That was over 20 years ago. Today, Geosat employs more than 500 people for spatial and terrestrial resources, and you'll be telling us about the role of data in networks and systems. Rémi de Tonac is an investor in sustainability associated. You are a partner at ETF Partners, and for many years you worked in technology with two different companies that were then that had very successful IPOs, but that was already a few years back. Well, a few years back, yes, not very long ago, but a few years back. So really, you are part and parcel of the tech company's success story in France. Now, as an investor, you're going to tell us about your vision of sustainable mobility. So let us now talk about clean mobility. Europe has set itself very ambitious objectives in terms of decrease of 55% decrease of greenhouse gases by 2030 compared to their 1990 level. It's true that car manufacturers, aircraft manufacturers, airlines, and train operators are all now telling us about their low carbon objectives and strategies. Rémi, as an investor, can you tell us why it is important to really engage in these new mobilities today so as to take up the challenge of sustainable mobility? Well, thank you very much, Laurence. This is something that is a must. And also, it's interesting. First of all, for three reasons. First of all, we're already in a post-oil area. Secondly, well, 90% of yesterday's mobility is based on oil products, and the oil peak happened 6-7 years ago, and we have something like 30 to 40 years worth of oil consumption left to us if we continue consuming oil at the same level. So we know it's something that must happen. Secondly, yesterday's type of mobility, and I'm not referring to trains, of course, which will continue, but we are very much aware that yesterday's mobility has been really making our life miserable. We know that in Paris and in New York or Tokyo, between 25 and 30% of downtown is actually used up by cars. And of course, this is a very premium asset. So if we now look at the future in, say, 7-8 years' time, or maybe 10 years' time, and when we have these level 4 type of cars, we're going to recover, say, 70% of this premium asset, the downtown assets, to allow for autonomous cars to be used. And we're going to use all of this space to build dwellings or to build parks and so on. And we'll think in the future, when looking back that we were really barbarians with tens of thousands of people dying on the road and a lot of pollution. Third reason is that it's profitable, and we know this. I could give you a ton of examples. Someone investing 10,000 euros in Tesla in 2014 today has now a capital of 1 million euros. The business angel investing in Virtuo back in 2015, has stayed with Thibault because there's still a lot the future is ahead of them, and there's still a lot to happen there. Well, thank you. Julien, we were talking about trains. And the railways are definitely a way to develop a clean and sustainable mobility. And it's true that we don't have this at the forefront of our minds. But for us users, I think it's really important to understand from you how we can, with tomorrow's train, reach our low-carbon objectives. Well, this is already low-carbon mobility when we talk about trains, and we believe that we are part and parcel of tomorrow's solution. However, we can still optimize things further, and even though we're low carbon energy, we still have some equipment and rolling stock and so on, which are oil product based, like, for instance, locomotives are still working with diesel. But we are now going to have trains, hybrid trains with, and we're going to have hydrogen trains as per 2023. And for instance, with the very fast trains, we thanks to big data, we're going to further improve its consumption. So this is something that's really important, so as to continue with the low carbon efficiency. Secondly, there's also the use of digital technologies to continue improving our performance. We have lots of maintenance operations on our networks, and so we use tech extensively. And therefore, we'll be looking at low carbon more generally, so as to have more customers. Our objective is to double our modal share, because train together accounts for 10% of French mobility in France, and we want to double this share. And we use deep tech for this, to have more customers. And also, when we operate our trains, we also look at our emissions. For instance, of course, in the area of digitalization, we have to have an eco-responsible policy, a low-carbon digitization policy. And so we have to have more customers, and also we have to be really low-carbon in each and every one of our activities. Eric, I will not come back to what Cédrico was saying about the Paris-Nice, but I have already forgotten the impact it has. But it's a lot, right? Yes, it's a lot. Okay, but you're going to explain to us how you can use levers to reach your low carbon footprint. So you are looking at the 2050 horizon. And what are the objectives so as to have a zero impact industry? Well, today the sector is carbon-based. All the physical flows have a 90% dependence on oil products. This is not the case for all countries. Where, for instance, an electrically operated train is decarbonized, but the electricity is not necessarily produced in a no-impact type of environment. So yes, to go back to the what was said before, it was about the Paris-Nice that we mentioned. Well, whether you drive or whether you fly, the overall carbon footprint is going to be the same. So we have a very efficient CO2 efficiency for planes today. And a passenger car has about the same level of efficiency. So you shouldn't be ashamed of flying to Nice, and it's much faster at any rate than driving there.
But it also shows that aviation, and that example more specifically, shows that aviation often is the punching ball when it comes to environmental protection. It's always targeted. I mean, it's only 2.5% of CO2 emissions at a global level. So it's quite big, relatively speaking, but it's also relatively small. I mean, 2.5% is not huge. And Airbus's strategy was really to focus on net zero aviation, to try and break away from that role of being the punching ball and try to bring some solutions to the table. So it's true that we are much more effective in terms of carbon intensity. We've come really a long way since the 1950s and the first jet generation. And we will continue to improve the carbon intensity of our planes. We're going to make planes that are lighter. It's not like a train that runs on train tracks. They can be as heavy as they can, but we want to have planes that are as light as possible. A electric plane with a battery, I think, is not going to happen anytime soon for passenger flights anyway. Tech and data are also very important so that we can optimize routes, and we also need to focus on choosing the right energy. A plane, like any machine, needs to run on some kind of energy. So the two avenues that we're focusing on at the moment are the sustainable aviation fuels, so the SAFs, that are essentially biofuels on biomass, and the current fleet can run on 50% of SAFs. And then you've got synthetic fuels like hydrogen, for example, and Airbus, as you know, recently declared its desire and even its plan to roll out in 2035 a plan that runs on hydrogen. So the question is, how can we have decarbonated hydrogen? Otherwise, it's of course not going to work. So that's for the longer term. But yeah, we're going to roll this out across 15 years. And we're probably going to start with medium-sized planes for medium distance trips. So we want to improve the effectiveness of plane, and we want to steer the whole industry towards fuels that are cleaner. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, planes and hydrogen, but also hydrogen and cars. Thibault, we're going to talk about cars once again. Now, I know that you're not per se a car manufacturer, but nonetheless, you play an important role in the industry, and you try to push the whole industry towards a low-carbon horizon. The deadline is 2035, and the objective is to do away with petrol engines or to phase them out, and all car manufacturers are going electric. So Thibault, you have made the same choice to have a 100% electric range by 2030, but you also have other commitments in the area of low-carbon technology. Can you tell us a bit more? Well, yes, absolutely. Just to pick up on the relationship between car and CO2 emissions, car transport is about 12.5% of global CO2 emissions, and a huge majority of cars are individual cars. So there's a huge amount of inefficiencies. Individual cars at the moment are used about 4% of the time, so 96% of the time they are parked. And for each car, you need 3 parking spaces, or 4 or 5 in the US. You need one at home, one at the office, one when you go to watch football, or when you go and do your shopping. So you have cars that are underused and take up a lot of space. So the first thing you want to focus on to drive down the 12.5% of CO2 emissions is to share cars. So we are in charge of a fleet that is shared by many people, so it is used by a greater number of passengers and covers a greater distance. And then there's the engines, the powertrains, as you said, the combustion engines release a lot of CO2, even though a lot of progress has been made in that area by car manufacturers. But when you look at the average car fleet, it's about 10 years old, and the cars 10 years ago emitted 50% more CO2 than they do now, and 20 years ago, twice as much as they do now. So we need to go electric with decarbonized electricity or energy supply. In the current system, individual cars are in fact a way of paying upfront for your trips, whether you buy a car or you lease it. So the incentive is to use it as much as possible, because the cost of a trip is only the cost of the fuel that you put in there. So you drag 2 or 3 tons of car to go to the office or go down the shops. And it's a lot of wasted energy, in fact. And we are now shifting towards an economy where, with our smartphones, we can access many different services, and it's going to substitute the individual car. So we're going to be much more efficient in the future, because we're going to realize that Uber is too expensive to go and just go down the shop. So you might walk there or take a bike instead. So it's a completely different way of looking at it all. And in 2021, we decided also to offset all of our carbon trips. Right now, we can't have 100% of our fleet that is electric, because it doesn't cover all the demand of our clients, and we don't have the necessary infrastructure, but we compensate or we offset all our emissions. Thank you, Martin. I'm going to now let you talk about efficiency, because Luc Julia outlined it earlier in his speech, and we're talking here about trip efficiency, and I think this is important, isn't it, for mobility? Well, yes, Rémi and Thibault have touched upon this already, but yeah, the efficiency of mobility systems is indeed crucial. It's the efficiency of the equipment, of the networks, and everything in between. And also the efficiency in terms of advantages for operators, users, and the ecosystem at large. So the burning question is, how can new technologies make all these new mobility technologies more efficient than what Rémi called old-time mobility? I think that drawing on data in transport is very useful to achieve greater efficiency. I think we should start off by talking about networks. Cédric, transport is now intermodal. How can we make sure that the different systems are interoperable? How can they feed data to each other? How can the network be efficient by being connected? Well, in fact, there are already some success stories in terms of mobility. Look at trains, look at planes, where a lot of information is exchanged around. Look at users, for example, who have apps, and these apps allow them to know exactly what's going on the ground. And there's also all the communication platforms between the infrastructures that organize the travel and the actual rolling equipment. So we're not starting from scratch. Now, when it comes to a deregulated mode of transport, such as cars, individual cars at least, that, of course, throws up a lot of questions. For instance, when it comes to organizing stuff, and Thibault mentioned it earlier, we need to know where these vehicles are at any given moment in time. So you need to be able to track these vehicles at all times. And if you go a bit further towards autonomous transport, tracking and positioning is extremely important. Currently, we are looking into having a oversight platform that allows us to know where the vehicles are at all times. And in the forecasts in terms of autonomy and ride sharing, we believe that there will be fewer vehicles on the road. So that means less data to process. And when you start processing data, there are two paradoxes. The first one was in fact outlined by Luc Julia earlier. It's the reliability and the expertise of data. You don't need to recognize a cat in the field of transport. We worked with the Kitty base a few years ago when we worked with AI, our first foray in AI, and the feedback was very poor because the database does not allow us to have any conclusive results. So we need expert data. We also need to look at the volume of data, because if you've got a platform that oversees traffic, then you're going to have a lean system. Now, of course, we are a bit more efficient now than we used to be when it comes to processing data. But if we can put the bar high enough to say, okay, we want lean data and reliable data, then we will have the necessary framework to be more efficient. Okay, thank you very much, Cédric. For the SNCF in France, of course, interoperability is very important. SNCF is a French rail system. There are some new behaviors now since the pandemic. How have we shifted to this new pattern where we consume mobility? Well, people are hungry for mobility at the moment. It's true that during the pandemic, when we couldn't go anywhere, we realized how important mobility was for work and just to feel fulfilled, generally speaking. So mobility is about different modes of transport. For example, if you catch a train, you're not only going to use the train, you're not going to live in the train station, you're then going to get a taxi, etc. So there is this necessity to use different modes of transport. The train will not take you from your doorstep to the office or to wherever you have an appointment. So to try and draw more people towards the train, we've worked on interoperability with other kinds of transport. And this is where tech comes into play. On our app, we sell train tickets, and now we also sell complementary transport modes. So it's a kind of marketplace where you can pay for a train ticket, but also a coach. You can also rent a scooter, pay for a taxi. And the idea is to try and have an app that brings all of this together, where it's a true integrated mobility solution. The heart of it is the train, and around this you can rent a bike to get to the station, and then a taxi when you arrive to get you to the office or wherever you need to go. So that's important for our business as a company, but also it's good from a low carbon perspective. Okay, thank you very much. Now, let's take a look at this from the standpoint of users. What they're looking for is more flexibility. So this question is for Thibault. How are you going to innovate? How are you going to change the customer pathway to bring them this more flexible mobility that they're asking for? Well, for us, the main issue at play really is to substitute the individual car, which is one of the more comfortable things out there. Everybody's got their car waiting for them on their doorstep. But what we need to come up with is a seamless customer pathway. And what helped Virtuo really to grow was the Bluetooth energy technology. In other words, the technology that enables you to open your car with your smartphone. And then you can build a whole customer pathway within the app that is as smooth as possible. So investing in that customer pathway will bring people your way. And Rémi, from an investor's perspective, and to tie this in with the theme that we discussed earlier, all these technologies that make mobility more efficient, they need to be compatible, and are they compatible with green objectives? Well, I'm going to rephrase it. For these green mobilities to be efficient, they have to draw on and they have to rely on big data, deep tech, etc., etc. Thibault talked about the efficiency of his ride-sharing system, but a car that is shared is as efficient as 10, 15 cars owned by private individuals from an efficiency point of view. Now, you probably don't want to give away too many secrets, but there's AI, there's big data, you need to know where you position your fleet, how you rebalance it, etc. But if you want 100% green mobility, then, you know, we'll all be on sailboats or riding horses, but that's not efficient. Another example, autonomous cars or self-driving cars. It's 1 gigabyte per second that reaches the brain of the autonomous car. So all the radars, all the sensors, all the cameras around the car, every second they send to the brain of the car the equivalent of a 1 hour and 30-minute film. So all the graphic processors, all the AI code processors, I mean, these huge machines that you need to cool down. In autonomous cars right now, the battery is mainly used to make this brain run rather than making the car actually go forwards. So that huge amount of data needs to be processed in 5 microseconds. That's how quickly a car needs to make a decision. Do I go straight and pile up with the other cars, or do I turn to the right into the tree, or to the left into a crowd of people? So if you don't have green tech, you don't have green mobility that allows you to make a more efficient system. In some sectors, the transition will lead to declining growth. And in mobility, deep tech will allow you to be extremely more efficient, and it's already the case with Virtuo.
Let's move on to the last theme of this roundtable. How can we make mobility safer? Because, of course, the passengers will be better protected, the equipment or the transportation infrastructure will be better protected as well. As Rémi was mentioning before, there are lots of technologies that may be a bit scary, especially when we talk about the self-driving car. It is true for the automotive sector, but it's also true for trains or planes. So the challenge here is to make people place their trust in these new technologies. And these new technologies will allow us to have a greener, more efficient mobility, but how can we make sure that they give us a safer mobility? And the first question is for Eric at Airbus. How do you use data to minimize the risk of accidents, for instance, or to allow clients to continue taking planes and flying in the current situation, for instance? Well, in the area of safety, obviously the airplane sector has an exceptional result, 1 fatality for 1 million flights. And the systems on board the plane, the electronic systems, which have been there for over 3 decades already, monitor the plane on a real-time basis, so as to have a maximum level of safety, but also to optimize maintenance and costs. And all of this works hand in hand. And we really have something that's very efficient with very significant data flows that are managed by the airlines. And the airline is responsible for this onboard architecture. And this allows us to anticipate maintenance and breakdowns and so on, and improve airplane safety. Now, on this particular point, I refer to the hydrogen fueled plane. And I think that's one of the main challenges today for the new developments is namely to integrate safety as a critical parameter in the design at the design stage. And this will be true, even more true for hydrogen-fueled plane with the cryogenic systems, the storage systems, and all of that technology. These are the main challenges today. Now, on the train side, safety, of course, is something that's quite crucial, that's really essential. And we can imagine that at SNCF, data analysis is really a major component of your daily life, so as to ensure safety of passengers, of the equipment, of the infrastructure. So you have these three aspects to deal with. So how can technology help you to develop more safety on these three segments that I just referred to, which may be quite different from one another? Now, on these three segments, let me give you a few figures. We have about 30,000 kilometers of tracks, 17,000 trains per day in France, and there's, of course, a real safety aspect to all of this. We have to have total security whenever you board a train. And then there are also issues relating to maintenance and quality of service. Because on top of safety, of course, we want to deliver the best possible quality trains that are as punctual as possible, and so on and so forth. And so, of course, we use data increasingly, as well as tech and IoT and sensors. So we've been deploying a lot of IoT on our network. I mentioned the tracks to monitor the rails, to monitor the heating of the equipment, including the impact of the weather, and to see how the infrastructure reacts to weather. We also are deploying sensors on our trains. We put sensors on the old trains, but on the new trains, we already have these sensors incorporated in the TGV, the fast train. In 2024, we're going to have an impressive number of data, and this means that we have to have a lot of connectivity and 5G and so on to be able to recover, to collect all of this data, because it's massive data today. So this about the new equipment. And for the older equipment, we now are equipping it, fitting sensors in there. But if I take a safety example, between major towns, we have older trains called Corail, and the doors of these trains have to be checked by the conductor one by one, making sure that they're well closed and locked before the train starts. So with sensors, okay, now we can deploy these sensors on each and every door, and if the door is not locked, is not closed properly, then there's an alert sent to the conductor. So this allows to save time, to avoid any delay, and to make sure that the train leaves on time. Because, of course, if you leave on time, you have more chances to arrive on time. So this is very, very important. So we use these sensors for this. And also, as far as customer service is concerned, I mentioned the stations. We have 3,000 stations in France. So we have sensors on escalators, for instance, to see whether they're working or not, in operation or not. If not, then there's an alert sent off to the maintenance department quickly. So we are now fitting sensors everywhere. And as far as the network is concerned, we also have doors that protect the infrastructure from animals intruding on the network. And so we have sensors there as well. So this helps us to improve safety, to improve service in general. And so we also have future material that we're going to have future equipment, as I mentioned before, where there will be a lot of data collected to further improve service. Now, still on the issue of safety, Luc Julia was trying to scare us a bit before, where the car would stop because somebody was on the street carrying a stop sign. So I imagine Cédric as an expert in modeling networks and an expert in mapping. Can you tell us about your experience? Because we're working on ever-increasing autonomous systems. So do you think that 3D modeling is a good resource for this? How can you use it to increase safety and efficiency and making sure that everything runs smoothly? Well, Rémi was saying something which is really telling. How can I decide in 5 microseconds when I have 1 gigabit of data? 1 gigabyte of data. And what do I do when my leader gives me a different information from what I have on my video? What do I do when I have a false positive? So there's always such vulnerability. And I think at Airbus, you work on the same premises. You have to confirm your data from 3 different data sources. So if you look at sensors, unfortunately, the decision time is a bit longer because you have to analyze, and 5 microseconds is very, very, very short. Now, if you start contextualizing the area, if you say, for instance, that the stop sign that's on the guy's T-shirt is a false positive, and that the real stop sign is at this particular location, is in place there, and that you'll have to stop there and not anywhere else, and that the regulatory dynamic environment, which is not on the map, is something that's going to disturb the traffic, you help increase efficiency because you are actually describing the semantics to the sensors and the actual geographic location of what is going to be found on the way. And in this way, you speed up and you increase safety in the operation. So you have the object, it's at the right location, so I'm at the right location. So you also improve safety, okay, because the car is going to stop where it's supposed to stop and is not disturbed by a false positive that may have been generated by the sensor. Well, I have a Tesla myself, and I'm given back control all the time, and it's reassuring. Yes. It is reassuring. So we have now reached the end of our discussion on those 3 themes related to mobility. But before we actually stop, I would like to ask a question to all of our 5 speakers. Now, do you think there is something, some technological development that you should absolutely not miss? Well, for us, it's decarbonization and the selection of the right and the right energy for the future. Possibly, it might not be just a single choice. Maybe there will be a whole range of possible choices, and so we have to pick the right decarbonized energy for aviation. This is what is at stake for our future. Yes, I think that we see that there is a lot at stake from the technological standpoint. We have now industries that are developing, for instance, where China, for instance, is massively developing trains, and they're now interested in what we are developing from the tech standpoint, and we are invited to actually share our know-how with them. So I think we need to go fast here to implement these solutions. That's interesting. Well, I'm not going to talk about the self-driving car again because we mentioned it extensively already. But I think that in the transport industry, what's at stake is efficiency and the rate of use of our fleets, and also I think that AI can bring us a lot of efficiency gains. Yes, well, I think that basically it all revolves around data, around not just collecting data, but analyzing data and using it. And I think we have to have a very responsible behavior on this, so as to get our customers' trust as to what we do with the data. So there's the issue of trust and responsibility. We were mentioning the ethics before. And I think that this is something that has to be at the forefront of what we do. In the SNCF group, we have 270,000 employees, so they also have to be on board. Well, I'll be in the shoes of Renault or Peugeot today, and of course, what we shouldn't miss on is the self-driving car. And the first thing that we have to do is to define a software architecture for our cars. There will be a change of paradigm where we're going to have a software-defining car, a car that is designed around the software, when actually the car in itself is the most beautiful hardware in the world, but it means a real change of culture. And if we miss this, then we will be slave to Google or Tencent or Tesla, possibly. So there's a lot at stake. So it's a good thing that we have Luc Julia on board to go through these troubled waters. Just one last point. The Tesla is called a four-wheel telephone. Well, I would say it's a four-wheel computer myself. Yeah. Well. Something that you all agree with is the fact that we have to use all the data well and also be fast, not be afraid of innovating to develop increasingly clean, efficient, and connected mobilities. So Cédric has to leave us. His train won't wait for him. Yes, yeah, the train will leave on time, so you have to go there. You have to go and run to catch your train. So thank you to all of you for having shared your vision with us on new mobilities. Now we are going to move on to our question and answer session. So if you have any question, please go ahead. Don't hesitate telling us who you are and what kind of question you have for one or the other of our speakers.
D'État massive. Est-ce que la...
Now, looking at European data regulation, does this put you in a competitive advantage or a competitive disadvantage position compared to your Chinese and American competitors? Well, so far, the companies in my portfolio working on mobility have not complained about GDPR. But others say, okay, actually say, well, because we comply with GDPR, we are in a better position than our Chinese or American competitors on some markets. Yeah, I think that GDPR is not a constraint. I mean, I was talking about trust and building trust. For us, this is incredibly important. We were talking about digital transformation and so on. SNCF started back in 2000 with voyagesncf.com, and the very first time that people actually paid on the web was on an SNCF site, because there was a lot of confidence in SNCF at the time. I think that for the moment we are in a fairly good situation, and I believe that this trust is that's going to be very valuable for the future. And our international competitors are actually looking to Europe to see what's done there. Yes, I can confirm what Rémi has said. I don't see any specific constraint for our business when we are GDPR compliant. Well, this we have to de-identify, we have to anonymize data, but that's all that we have to do, and it's not such an enormous piece of work. And when I look at what's happening in China, I mean, we're going to have GDPR everywhere, and we'll possibly have a competitive advantage because we'll be ahead of the others on this particular point, because all governments will want to have data protection at some point, and the public will ask for it. Thank you. Is there any other question? Yes, my name is Patrick Sandras. I have a sci-fi question. Do you know of an energy on which researchers could work that would be decarbonized and perfectly efficient? Do you know of such an energy? Well, Eric, in the aviation sector. Well, there's nuclear fusion that we've been discussing at length, which is extremely expensive, that won't be with us for another 30 years. We have the ITER project in the south of France on this question that's been working on it for about 20 years. Over the past 3-4 years, 3 of the 10 most richest people in the world, Bill Gates and maybe Jeff Bezos, have invested from 50 to 100 million in startups working on this particular in this particular area. So it's not just the states with a lot of bureaucracy and a very slow pace that's looking at this. It's startups which are looking at proof of concept on nuclear fusion. And this, I think, is the major hope looming on the horizon in about 30 years' time. But in the aviation sector, there's no miracle solution at this point. Well, no. Well, if the world is to be decarbonized by 2050, all primary energies will have to be decarbonized. So this is a challenge for everyone. So again, we'll have to have a lot of better or increased fuel efficiency. And Luc mentioned the question of the computer that actually spent or consumed 20 times more energy, I think. But anyway, we need a lot of power on in aircraft, but in cars, over half of the battery's load is consumed by the system. So at some point, we have to add all of this up.
Okay, do we have another question? Okay, there are no questions in the room, so I will ask one of my own. I have a question. In fact, I would like to try and ask you a question about aviation. What about vertical planes and autonomous taxi? Is that still the level 5 autonomous car that will never happen, or not? Well, autonomous taxis that fly in the air, they do exist. There are a few that have been made by Airbus. They can carry 3 or 4 people. And recently we announced a new project called City Airbus. It's a kind of a hybrid between a helicopter and a plane. And it runs on a small amount of energy because of its design. So yeah, there's a prototype that is currently under construction, and in 2023 we should be entering the test phase. Now the question will be whether this is going to be accepted by people or not, because yeah, we don't want to have traffic jams in cities, but how is it going to play out in the air in cities if you have a helicopter or a smaller taxi, air taxi that flies by your window? You know, what's the reaction going to be? But yeah, for a lot of projects we're looking at autonomous flights. Once again, it's really about weight. If you've got an extra person that is driving the plane, then it's more weight. So if it's autonomous, you can fit an extra person in there. But that will be for, you know, the long term after autonomous cars. Okay, do we have another question? Do you think that a better access to funding would allow you to grow your companies faster? Well, yes, as always. Well, of course, I mean, Virtuo could not have reached our current state of development if we had not received funding as easily as we have done recently, so to speak. There's the tech aspects, so for us it's smartphones, but if you don't have capital available, of course, you won't go very far. Well, yes, of course, it's true for startups, and in fact, that's why we've set up a fund, because we need to fund startups to help them grow and help them to help us. So it's virtuous for the whole ecosystem and allows us to progress and grow. Well, invest in my fund and I'll pick the right startups, believe me. Okay, well, it's mobility, circular economy. We've covered it all then. Okay, well, look, I think that we've run out of questions and also we've run out of time. So thank you very much to our 5 speakers. It was fantastic to discuss mobility with you. We could go on for many more hours, but we had to keep it brief for today. So thank you very much and see you soon.